Right. Testing, testing. Is that a good level? Excellent. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock on the hour, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Jessica West, and I am a human wildlife conflict specialist for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. You may also know us as the Department of Fish and Game. We're the same agency, but we did actually change our name back in 2013 to better reflect that we not only manage game species, but also wildlife, all wildlife for that matter. And before we get started, I did just want to acknowledge my colleague Rebecca Barbosa is here. We're going to be able to answer some questions at the very end of the presentation. Yes, hello, thank you. We also have some folks from San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments as well, so thank you very much for being here. And I think we do, is that right? I'm so sorry. Maybe I'm forgetting exactly who is associated with which. My apologies, I thought we had some folks here. Oh, thank you. I apologize. Inland Valley Humane. My apologies. Thank you. Welcome. You're going, who? What? Thank you for being here, Humane Society. Thank you. And of course, thank you to the city as well for having us out here this evening. Tonight, we're going to be discussing a couple of different points in regards to the recent bear activity that the city had. First, we're going to be discussing some basic bear biology and behavior. Then we'll be going over some conflict bear management, what actually is a conflict bear. And then probably most importantly for all of us this evening is how do we actually prevent conflicts with bears going forward? And before we get started, I did just want to provide this brief acknowledgement. We do understand that human-wildlife conflict can be pretty politicized, emotional. It's complicated, right? It's complex. It's contextual. We do recognize that attitudes, values, perception, tolerance of wildlife is going to vary widely amongst residents. And we do also recognize that community knowledge, identities, traditions, these are all interconnected with our natural resources. Right now, there is a very big push within the department to try to address these conflicts or these issues as proactively as possible versus reactively. All right, so we'll go ahead and jump in. I think before we even begin to really talk about conflict, it's important to discuss a bit about bear behavior, ecology, some biology, to basically understand why it is that we're having these issues. And so first and foremost, I did just want to mention, we do only have black bears here in California. Sometimes there is misconception that we still have grizzlies. We'll touch on that a little bit later. But so this evening we are discussing black bear biology because there are only bear species that we have in California. But their typical habitat is going to be mountainous, foothill areas, typically above 3,000 feet elevation. Adult weight's going to vary quite a bit depending on gender as well as resources available. But males are going to be larger. They're going to be about 350 pounds max. Females about 200. However, they can get upwards of 600. You may be familiar with Hank the Tank, who is in the Tahoe region. Very large bear. So again, it just sort of depends on resources and gender. Home range size also varies quite a bit. It's typically about 60 to 150 square miles, although here in the San Gabriel Mountains, it's only about 3 to 11. And this is primarily because, again, resources, right? There's so many resources available to them, there really isn't a need to necessarily venture so far. And I will also note, bears aren't necessarily very territorial. They certainly communicate with other bears and sort of maintain their own space, but they're not really holding territories like, say, a mountain lion would. Diet, just like us, they are omnivorous, so they're going to be eating primarily vegetation, but also insects, some animal material as well, or animal protein. So hibernation, I did want to touch on this. So not all bears hibernate, as I'm sure some folks here are aware, especially here in California. Because we have such mild winters and there is, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, such an ample amount of resources here, there really isn't a need for bears to hibernate. Some do, some do not. Some will just go into sort of a seasonal torpor, which is a form of hibernation, but when these bears become a little bit less active, it is, of course, in winter, so about November to March, and that period of less activity lasts for about 3 to 4 months. And then lastly, population estimates to our current understanding is about 30,000 to 40,000 throughout the entire state. There are actually projects in the works right now to try to get more current information about their numbers. Yeah, so that's a broad estimate, and about the lifespan's about 20 to 25 years for bears. Okay, so as I mentioned, some folks do misidentify them as grizzly bears, right? So the name is a little deceptive. You're thinking it's a black bear, they should all be black. However, in California, most of the time, you're going to be seeing brown black bears. So again, the name is deceptive, but they are actually black bears. So brown is one of the more common colors, as is this sort of cinnamon blonde, brown, and then also very blonde, right? So true Southern California bear, we have our blonde California bears because of that California sun. But so yeah, it's actually pretty normal to see a wide variety of colors within black bears. So where do bears live? So you can see here we do have a range map. The green areas are where bears are found, primarily throughout California. You may also notice that the green is about, I guess, proximal or the same location as our mountainous areas. So that makes sense. We have the Sierras, the coastal range, all throughout Northern California. Historically, they were actually only found in Northern California in these mountainous areas. But now, currently, we have them in nearly all mountainous and foothill areas throughout California. The reason for this is they have experienced a range expansion. And for those who weren't aware, so we actually did not have black bears in this region up until about the 1930s. They actually were translocated from Yosemite, so that is why we have black bears now. They were actually, again, introduced into this area. So, we did, again, have grizzlies. We've always had bears in Southern California, but now it's just a different species. So, just something to keep in mind. And again, because the California grizzly did go extinct in about 1924, that's our best guess as to the last credible sighting of a grizzly near Sequoia National Park, actually. Because grizzlies went extinct, black bears essentially filled that niche. They were able to, take advantage of the same resources that the grizzlies did. So when we think about bear habitat, right, we definitely think about these beautiful coniferous mountainous areas. And absolutely, this is fantastic bear habitat. And then we get into places like this, right? So this is a beautiful oak woodland. And yeah, absolutely, this is still fantastic bear habitat. But you might also notice in the corner here, we have a picnic table, which, means that this could also potentially be human habitat, right? So this is where we start to have this sort of interface between black bear habitat and human habitat. And then when we get in areas like this, you're thinking, well, I can see how this might be considered somewhat of an urban forest, right? It's right up against the foothills. So is it bear habitat? Is it human habitat? Is it both, right? That's the question. The fact that we have been moving steadily into these foothill communities, the bears, quite honestly, don't really see a difference between human habitat and bear habitat. And so, we grow up with this term bear country, right? I think we all grew up learning this term, bear country. But in actuality, like I say, bears and other wildlife, they really don't understand these property lines or boundaries. And, as long as those four requirements for suitable habitat are present, right? So the food, water, shelter, as well as conspecifics, which just means other individuals or other bears, human country can very easily become bear country, especially if we're not addressing those attractants, which we will get into a little bit later. So just to touch briefly on reproduction as well, because this is an important point to make. So typically bears are going to be breeding in the summer, and then in the winter, you're going to have very young hairless cubs, or nearly hairless cubs, born in their winter dens, typically with their mother. In the springtime, that's when they're going to emerge from their dens, and then they're going to be weaned about summertime. That's when they're going to start eating solid foods. They're going to then stay with mom for about 2 years, and this is because as a large carnivore, they need to spend a lot of time with mom learning how to be a bear. So typically, you'll see very large cubs with mom, and again, that's because they stick around for about 2 years. But then in that second summer, that's about when they leave. And it's important to note that when it comes to reproduction, they actually can exhibit what's known as delayed implantation. Basically, what this means is, essentially they can choose or determine whether or not they can have cubs that year. And by that I mean they can actually delay the implantation of that embryo in their uterus. They can do this because it's influenced by their fat reserves. So a female, if she has insufficient fat reserves, she can actually, again, delay that implantation and have no cubs. However, if she has great fat reserves, she can have anywhere from 2 to 5 cubs. And this is important to note because, we have reasons, to suspect that in these areas where bears are accessing human foods and resources, we could very well be increasing their population simply because, again, all those resources are available. And just to touch on bear senses as well. So their sight is about equal to ours. Of course, they can see a little bit better in the dark than we can. Hearing is excellent. You can probably guess by looking at those very sonar-like ears on their head. But really, it's that sense of smell. It is mind-bogglingly amazing. So just to show you an example, so here we have a bear nose, a bloodhound nose, and a human nose. Basically, a bear can smell about 7 times better than a bloodhound and 100 times better than a human. So to put this in perspective, picture a can of beans. So we as humans probably can't smell the beans through that can. But if we empty it out, put it in a pot, start heating it up, then we can smell the beans. A bloodhound, you can probably imagine, can smell the beans through the can, right? A bear can smell what the worker smelled like, who put the beans in the can. So that's how amazing it is. Incredible sense of smell. And truly, this is what they are using for that constant search for food. Every day a bear wakes up thinking, how do I find food? Where's the food? Can I eat the food? They're all about food. And again, they are omnivores, so they're pretty much eating anything and everything from fruit to more fruit. They're also eating insects out of logs. So what happens, right, is if we have these resources nearby to our residence, basically the bears are going to pick up on the extra or maybe unnatural food sources that are adjacent, right? So here you can see, this is not in California, but coniferous woodland. Bear was probably off eating berries, something out in the woods, and then thought, hey, this bird seed actually smells pretty great, and became interested in the bird seed. And then, unfortunately, that's when we start getting into trash issues. That's a big one, as I'm sure you're all aware with bears. Very, very intelligent. They absolutely can recognize objects as a food reward. So if they've gotten food from it before, they will almost certainly keep trying to find those objects again, which includes trash cans. So, yes, exactly. So bears are using that sense of smell to find all of this available food to them. So, biology takeaways before we move on to the next section. So, bears are incredibly intelligent, they're well adapted, and they can be active at any time, and again, constantly looking for food. Human country can often overlap with bear country, and abundant food sources provided by people might actually be increasing bear populations. Okay, so now that we know a bit more about biology, behavior, let's dive into what is a conflict bear and how are they actually managed by the department. So what is a conflict bear? Essentially, this is a bear that requires some kind of action, either by the department or the public, due to whatever behavior or situation it's exhibiting. This does include, we have 4 different categories. This is per our very recent bear policy that was actually just published in February. You can find that on our website if you'd like to learn more. But essentially, they're categorized into these 4 kinds of bears. So we have the no harm, no foul, habituated, depredation, and public safety. And we'll be touching on what each one of those is. But that type of conflict is going to influence that management response for that individual bear. So the usual scientific answer is it depends very much so on what is happening, the location, the temperament of the bear, are there people nearby? So all of these things have to be analyzed essentially in order to make those management decisions. And I did just want to note, bears are very shy, timid animals by nature. They're usually avoiding people and direct interactions as much as possible. Again, it's really just looking for the food, the water, the shelter that brings them into this contact essentially with humans in these urban and suburban areas. Okay, so no harm, no foul bear. This one might be a little bit obvious. Essentially, this is a bear that's wound up in the wrong place, wrong time sort of situation. The bear isn't necessarily causing any damage. It could have just wandered in essentially to the community. So it's food, not confrontation. This bear is simply looking for food and just ended up being spotted by someone and now is essentially, stuck in that situation. They're going to be typically those younger juvenile bears that we see as these no harm, no foul bears. And usually our direction for these kinds of bears, again, very much depends on situation, location, but it's to give them space and time to leave on their own. Very often there is suitable habitat nearby to wherever this bear has wound up, and so we do want to encourage them to essentially make it back on their own whenever possible. So yes, hazing or moving, depending on who is responding. Yeah, hazing is a strategy used again to try to just encourage them back into more suitable habitat. But if they do wind up in a situation again where there's no access, immediate access to suitable habitat, that is when we will step in and actually relocate that bear. Okay, so habituated bears. So this is a bear that's becoming a general nuisance, right? It's getting into trash, getting into birdseed, pet food, but no extensive property damage has occurred. There's no aggression being observed or documented towards a human. Again, they're just sort of, it's kind of almost like a wrong place, wrong time sort of situation, but now they've really become accustomed, right, to finding these food sources in these areas. And so our typical recommendations are to really look around and say, what is it that's causing the bears to frequent these areas? And then trying to remove or preventing access to those attractants. And you could actually argue, our urban bears or suburban bears, they might actually be born habituated, right? Because if they are, growing up in these foothill communities, mom is showing them how to find food, how to get into trash, they are essentially born, with this, still a fear of humans, but maybe just a little bit more tolerant than, say, a more wild bear would be. So getting into the more serious issues, so this would be an example of a depredation bear. I believe this was in Tahoe, of a unoccupied dwelling that a bear was able to gain access into. Again, pretty extreme example, but most of the time when we do hear about bears entering into residences, they're typically unoccupied or a door or a window was left open, which basically allowed that curious bear to sort of, progress to the next step, which was entering a residence. But again, this is a pretty extreme example. But a depredation bear, right, so they're threatening to, damaging, or actually destroying property. Typically, in these situations, we recognize that hazing isn't necessarily as effective, or maybe the usual forms of hazing or scaring a bear. So that's when we start to recommend more advanced deterrence and hazing. So that can include things like pursuit by dogs, rubber bullets, really intensive hazing measures to really focus in on this one bear, and try to get him to, not be basically, getting into this sort of conflict in the future. At this point in time, depredation permits can actually be requested and issued. And just to get into that a little bit, so essentially the property owner takes the bear, right? So they actually, because we're a regulatory agency, they can request this permit to then lethally remove that bear. Something to consider, though, is, excuse me, of course, you have to consider strict firearms ordinances within city limits. And so in those situations where a permit is issued, they're typically then going to need to work with a licensed trapper to actually trap the bear and then lethally remove it elsewhere. But again, proper management of attractants early on can prevent this kind of behavior. And lastly, again, this is the more serious form of bear, so our public safety bear. So this is a bear that has made some kind of physical contact with a human, or it's exhibiting some kind of immediate threat to public health and safety. Immediate threat in this case means that a bear is exhibiting one or more aggressive behaviors directed towards a person. And the caveat here is that only law enforcement personnel can actually make that determination. So myself as a biologist, I can report reports essentially of what I'm being told as far as what people are seeing as far as bear behavior, interactions. I can provide this to law enforcement, but only law enforcement can actually make that ultimate determination of, is this bear actually a public safety threat or concern? And so one of the most common questions we get is, well, why can't we just relocate the bear, right? That seems like a good solution. Just move the bear out of here, put him back in the woods. There's more habitat back there, and hopefully he won't come back. But the unfortunate reality is it's not a truly feasible option for a number of reasons. One is that bears often become disoriented, and oftentimes they will actually come right back. They will travel hundreds of miles, astonishing distances, to return basically, if not to the same location, very close by. And while they're trying to return, they may actually be killed then right in that process because they might be crossing roads, so you have to worry about cars. There may be other competitor bears, and it also is essentially moving that problem bear to another area, right? Now we've just sort of moved the problem elsewhere. It also opens up space for another bear to take its place. There's also the potential to spread disease. Anytime you're moving an animal from one area to another, you never know, if there's something that bear is carrying that could be spread to, the other wild bears in that area. And, for me personally, I like to think, what is the wild anymore, right? I mean, there are 40 million people in California now. And even places that we might think of as truly wild, they're still impacted, whether that's by roads, pollution, or recreation. So really, what is the wild anymore? We'll get that question. Yeah, just move the bear to the wild. But again, there's just so much, development, people. It's hard to know what really is a good spot for these bears. And then really, it really isn't addressing the root of the problem, right? If the attractants are still there, that food, the water, the shelter, it's very likely to continue attracting bears as well as other wildlife. So that's really the big focus is just trying to figure out what is it that's causing the bears to be here? How do we make it so that they don't want to be here? So our management takeaways before we move on to conflict prevention. So we are the regulatory agency, CDFW, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the regulatory agency responsible for responding to wildlife incidents and conflict reports. Different kinds of incidents and levels of conflict bears are going to result in different kinds of management responses. And relocation is usually not an effective method in preventing conflict. We really need to take a more proactive approach when addressing these issues. Okay, so moving on now to a very important topic, which is how do we even prevent these conflicts from happening in the first place? So first and foremost, never feed wildlife. I can't stress this enough, whether that is intentionally or unintentionally. Because again, if they're losing that natural fear of people, that is when we can expect to potentially see that increase in conflict, right? If a bear learns to associate someone with food, not the person as a prey source, of course, but just as someone, as people give me food sometimes. One person might be okay with feeding a bear, but now that bear is going to potentially approach other people thinking, hey, I got food from, this guy. Why am I not getting food from this other person? And so that's when we hear about these bites, right? Although very rare, they do still occur, and it is because they're used to being fed by people. It's also against the law. So there is a Fish and Game Commission code that actually prohibits feeding big game mammals. And even places like LA County actually has an ordinance as well against feeding bears, and some cities as well. So it's a big deal. And as I'm sure you're all aware, there's going to be that consequence, as I've already alluded to feeding wildlife. Just to give you kind of a technical definition for habituation, basically the animal shows little to no overt reaction to people as a result of being repeatedly exposed to anthropogenic or human stimuli without substantial consequence. Basically, They haven't had a scary experience with a human, right? To the point where it's reinforcing, hey, I need to stay away from these things. So, the unfortunate reality is that bears that have caused property damage, that have killed livestock like chickens, or have been deemed a public safety threat by our law enforcement personnel, ultimately may have to be euthanized per our state depredation policy and laws. So it's a big deal. So really, when we have situations like this, it's important to note, right? I'm sounding like a broken record, but it's true. Proper management of attractants early on can prevent this kind of conflict, and that really is our goal. But the good news is there are several things that we can do, even just as individuals, to try to prevent this behavior. Before I get into hazing, it might be a little bit challenging to see this picture here, though. This was, oh gosh, I'm forgetting which city now, but pretty recently, it was caught on security camera, an Amazon driver delivering a package. And while he happened to be delivering the package, a bear actually wound up on the wall. But you can see all that he's doing here is lifting his arms. That is it. And there's video of this, and the bear just bolts. So it doesn't take much, especially for these bears that are still kind of naive, not so used to people. Again, they're all individuals. Some might need a little bit more than just raising your arms to scare them off, but it really does go a long way. So hazing or scaring, right, is this technique where deterrence or other scary noises, movements are used to modify that undesirable behavior or halt it. And again, the idea here is to essentially teach that bear that what it's doing is not going to be tolerated. I did just want to make a note that we don't recommend, of course, hazing mother bears with their cubs simply because they may act more defensively. But if you do have a sow, a female bear, with her cubs in your yard, and you feel safe enough to do so from within your home, you could still try to at least, reinforce or try to yell, but we obviously don't recommend approaching bears. This is more to your own comfort level, and I'd be happy to, speak with anyone after regarding different kinds of hazing and strategies. But yeah, so just a little introduction to hazing. And deterrence. So they go hand in hand with hazing. So these are similar to repellents. So basically they're devices or other methods used to keep animals away from certain areas or places. There's all different kinds of examples there. I can kind of briefly touch on each one in just a moment, but basically they are sensory items, right, that are discouraging that wildlife through sight, sound, smell, touch, or any combination. And I could probably give a presentation entirely just about deterrence because there are so many and so many different kinds. But just to kind of go through the list here from left to right. So left is just a trash bag. It's easy to carry. You can keep it in your pocket. And if you did happen to encounter a bear or other wildlife like coyotes, it's very easy to just take that out, wave it around. It's scary looking. It sounds scary. It's actually a really effective deterrent. There's also ammonia. We will often recommend for folks who are having bears visiting their trash cans, who are unable to get bear-resistant bins, to hang ammonia-soaked rags around their trash cans. It's actually one of the only scent deterrents, to my knowledge, that's effective for bears. Whistles, air horns, of course, so, that probably goes without saying, very loud, very frightening. The next one down is a water sprinkler. It's motion activated. And then, of course, electricity is used very frequently. It's very effective for bears. Beekeepers use this really frequently, as well as directly below that electric fence, you can see this kind of funky-looking gray thing. So that's actually an unwelcome mat. You can either purchase these or you can make them at home. But they come as electric versions or non-electric versions. But the idea is that, if bears are starting to hang out around your doorway or a window, this is something you can actually place there. Yeah, I'm hearing the noise. Thank you. Yes, it does. It gives them a little zap. Yeah, and it doesn't hurt them. Electricity, it's important to consider with bears. It needs to make contact with their skin. And so really it's the paws and then the nose. Those are the big contact points for bears. But yeah, it's very safe, and it just delivers a little zap to the bear, And yeah, if you're ever in the mood, you can look up videos of bears reacting to unwelcome mats. It's kind of sad, kind of funny, but I mean they do run pretty quickly. So again, all different kinds of things out there. More than happy to chat with anybody afterwards if you have specific questions. But of course, like most things, they're not 100% perfect. I did just want to provide some notes about deterrence. You have to consider that no deterrent is going to be 100% effective 100% of the time, right? And that's why we recommend using several different kinds consistently and over time. Every animal is an individual, and they're going to show different levels of tolerance to these deterrents, just like humans, right? Some of us might be more afraid of, I don't know, elevators, or something of that matter. Just like bears, right? Certain things are going to frighten them more than others, and they might become habituated to certain deterrents as well. But that's why we recommend don't give up. We will get reports of, yeah, I'm trying to scare the bear, he's not leaving. Keep trying. It really does go a long way. And that is also important why community effort is needed, right? Because maybe that bear will associate your yard with the scary thing, but if he goes to another person's yard and isn't scared away, vicious cycle. So that's why it's important that everyone tries. And I put up a bear bell specifically because some folks use them, they think as deterrence, others is just sort of like essentially letting the bear know that they're there. But I don't really think they're very effective as far as deterrence, because again, they're just going to associate, yeah, whenever I hear this bell, no, it just means someone's hiking down the trail. But yeah, so just a little note about deterrence there. And I would be remiss to not even mention bear-resistant trash cans, garbage cans. They can be a little bit costly. That is the one downside to these, but they are very effective. And some folks will choose to purchase their own. You may have to connect with the city just because obviously they may have a contract with a garbage hauler, and that would need to be sort of worked out with the hauler, with the city. So it's worth connecting with your city if you're interested in, looking to getting bear-resistant trash cans or bins. I do say resistant, by the way. You can't say proof because, again, all bears are individuals. There could be that one bear that figures out the one time how to get into something. So that's why we use the term resistant. And so, this doesn't mean that we can't have certain, attractants on the landscape. Basically, what it means, though, is that we just need to try to figure out ways to, again, prevent access to them, or I guess in some cases to completely remove. But, so just as an example, so bird feeders, right? A lot of people don't realize they're also bear feeders. They love birdseed, hummingbird, a nectar. They absolutely go for it. So we recommend either removing them entirely if you can, or just use them in the winter when bears are a little bit less active. Pet food and water is big, right? So keep that indoors. Make sure you're feeding your pets inside as well. Again, if you're not attracting bears, you could very well be attracting raccoons, opossums, skunks, coyotes, anything and everything is going to be interested in that food source or that water. For livestock, and this is again mostly in reference to chickens, provide those fully enclosed shelter structures, especially at night. Bears can be active at any time, and again, it just sort of depends on the bear, but definitely at night, keeping those animals within secure shelter structures is highly encouraged. And something to consider too with chicken coops. Unfortunately, a lot of standard designs are not bear resistant. A determined bear, will try anything and everything basically, excuse me, to try to get into these coops. And so sometimes we even recommend reinforcing them with electricity, similar to a beekeeper. Fruit trees, so yeah, just remove that fallen fruit, harvest them as much as possible and regularly. For gardens, electric fencing might be an option for some, might not be for others, but something to consider if you do have just the one fruit tree and bears are really honing in on it, you could potentially set up electric fencing around that one tree. Just another tool in the tool belt to consider. Barbecues, clean them regularly. Like I noted, bears absolutely key in on objects, and if they get one food reward one time from a barbecue, every other barbecue is going to have, some kind of interest basically to the bears going forward. So clean them regularly. Composting, that's another big one. And this we've kind of seen more recently as folks have gotten into home composting. Maybe consider, instead of having compost, in everyone's backyards, consider doing a community compost so that we can defend one area versus several. Beehives, again, electric fencing is really, it's pretty I would say critical for beehives, especially because a lot of beekeepers do keep their bees in more what you could consider suitable habitat for bears. So it's a must in bear habitat. Here I am saying bear country, and I'm trying to get away from using that term. But around the home, yeah, make sure to lock your windows, your doors. Again, a curious bear, if a window is open, a door is open, again, they may be interested in kind of just poking their head in, seeing, oh, yeah, okay, I do see there's a kitchen right here. So again, making sure anytime you leave your home or your vehicle, make sure that the doors are up or the windows are up and lock and trash, right? So using bear resistant trash cans is really a great strategy. If that's not really in the stars for you, you could also, if you have a garage, just try to keep it in the garage, only bring it out the day of pickup. And then there are also ways to retrofit trash cans. But again, this might kind of depend on, if you're renting or if you purchase the trash can. But there are ways other than just getting a bear resistant trash can. I did also want to touch on human bear encounters, right? So what do you do if you actually do encounter a bear in a suburban area or anywhere for that matter? So yeah, first and foremost, avoid cornering that animal. Back away slowly and speak in a low voice. The idea here is that we're trying to just let the bear know, hey, I'm a human. Hey, bear. Whoa, bear. Backing up, backing up. It's easier said than done, but don't turn your back and run. This goes for most wildlife simply because running could elicit that chase response. Maybe not so much with bears, but again, it's better to just keep your eye on that animal and just remove yourself from that situation. It's really about giving them room to escape, right? So don't corner them. Make sure that they have some kind of route. Give them respect, of course, and do not approach. If the animal approaches you, this is when you're going to want to stand your ground. You're going to make yourself look larger, yell, and I'll tell you, the human voice goes a long way. I've heard folks, trying to yell at a bear, and obviously in the heat of the moment, you're scared. You're going, oh my gosh, and so people will kind of go, hey bear, whoa bear, But really, I mean, you got to belt it. Don't be afraid. Like yell at that bear. Reinforce to him, hey, this isn't, you should not be approaching me. This is not a good situation. And again, this would be very rare, but if you were to be attacked by a bear, fight back. So don't play dead, right? But again, this is not a very common thing with bears. They really are trying to avoid us at all costs. And yeah, they're very much afraid, much more afraid of us than we are of them. So preventing conflict takeaways. So bears that cause property damage or threaten human safety may have to be euthanized. To avoid this kind of conflict, we must prevent bears from accessing our food in collaboration, right, or using deterrence and hazing. That all goes hand in hand. Humans and bears can coexist. It's up to each of us to prevent these conflicts. And it's up to each of us, but it is really a community effort, like I stressed. You could be doing everything correctly, have all of your attractants secured, but if your neighbors maybe aren't as much, you're still very likely going to continue having bears in the area. So it really is up to each of us to try to prevent these things from happening in the first place. This is my final slide. This is just some contact information. I'll leave this up if folks want to take a photo of it. This basically has some information for our website links. I wanted to make sure I noted, you'll see in the top right there, we do actually have a form that you can fill out on our website to report incidents. These would be non-emergency incidents, of course. It could be sightings, general nuisance sort of behavior. You could also list depredation incidents here as well. But this is just an option basically for you to connect with us to report what you're seeing in your community. I did also list a couple of phone numbers here as well. We have a volunteer hotline. This is really good for general questions about backyard wildlife. Maybe you're seeing bears or just kind of not really sure what to make of it. They are excellent. They are trained volunteers and they can provide you with some information. You can also contact our regional headquarters. That's the second number there. And again, if you do feel like you are an immediate threat or you are experiencing a wildlife emergency, absolutely call 911 in those situations. And then I've listed my email address on the bottom right. And I think that's it. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you coming out here this evening, and we'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, do you? Mm, mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So the question was, right, on trash pickup day, bears seem to key in on, the fact that all the trash cans are out now. Yes, you're absolutely right. So they are incredibly intelligent. They can figure out, which day it is, basically, and key in on those trash cans. I guess. Oh yeah, in Mammoth. Oh, yes. Yeah, that I mean that would be a good step to take, referring to having bear-resistant bins throughout the community. But yeah, as far as just, recommendations for trash day, yeah, there isn't a whole lot you can do other than, just trying to bring that trash can in as soon as possible. Maybe, you could possibly connect with that garbage hauler and try to say, hey, is there some way that maybe you can come, at this set time and then let the residents know that, hey, we're going to bring our trash cans out at this time and then bring them in as soon as possible. So there are options, but you're right, it's definitely a challenge because they are so smart and they know exactly when trash day is. Yes. Other questions? Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. That's a good question. Yeah, so the question was, if you encounter a mother bear and cubs on a trail versus just, yeah, one bear. Really the only other difference really would just be, don't get in between, the mother and cubs. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same thing. Just give them space, give them time, back away slowly, don't corner them. But no, that's a great question. It's pretty much at that point just, yeah, try not to get in the way in between them. Hmm. Yeah. Mm, yeah. Oh, really? Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm, mm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm, mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Okay. Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Probably. Yes. Yeah. No, that's a great point, and yeah, great question. Right. I mean, at that point in time, right, how much else can you do other than, you know, looking into bear-resistant trash cans? I recognize it's hard to obtain them, and there is a shortage right now as well. Yeah, just like most things. Yeah, so it's no, it's an uphill battle for sure. I definitely appreciate that you're trying different ways to prevent it from happening. That's great. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Right. Yeah, please. Right, yeah, the object. Oh, there he is. Yeah. Gosh. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, hand raised again in the back there. Mhm. Mhm. Right. No, and I'm glad you. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Cut you off. Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. No, we also don't want him to be eating into your trash. No, and I'm glad you mentioned that. That is something that some cities will do is they will actually instead of having, a garbage can per person, having one sort of communal location, maybe at the end of a street or even just yeah, some sort of, easy to access location and right, so that is something to work with on the city. I would recommend looking into the city of Durango in Colorado, if anyone's familiar with what they have done. So the city actually has provided bear-resistant trash cans to every resident within the city limits. Again, it just sort of depends on the city, finances, everything, of course. But you're right. I mean, that is the ultimate solution to garbage is just let's make it so they can't get to the garbage. Yeah. Any other questions? I know I covered a lot, so I appreciate you listening for as long as I did, or you did. Yeah, uh-huh. I did not talk about coyotes. Is there something you'd like to know about coyotes? We definitely talk about them too. Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, but you've noticed kind of influx in populations here and there. Yeah, so oh yeah. Yeah, I actually did. I was here not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and I did see a coyote with mange while I was in town. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Yeah, I should say it's most likely mange. But yeah, that is unfortunately something, and I will address your other question, but for mange, right, that's usually associated with anticoagulant rodenticides. You might be familiar with what's going on in the Santa Monica Mountains. Nearly, I think I forget the exact number, but excuse me, nearly all of the animals in Santa Monica's have tested positive for rodenticide. Right. And so when their immune system is compromised because they're eating these prey sources that have consumed these rodenticides, basically fleas have kind of free range on them, on these predatory species. And right, it just wreaks havoc. And that's how they get mange, essentially. But so to answer your other question regarding, she had noted, it sounds like there's some kind of differences in coyote behavior, or excuse me, population, seeing more, sometimes seeing less. It's a good question. It'd be hard to know for absolutely sure. I will say there is going to be some sort of seasonal difference. Right now, we're right in the middle of pup rearing season for coyotes, and so it's not too uncommon to be seeing what seems like more coyotes because they're out and about, they're catching food for their pups. You might be seeing the pups as well. So we do tend to hear more sightings, more reports of coyotes around this time. I think it's usually about March to August. But right, it's so hard to know why for sure for coyotes and really any wildlife species, why it seems like either all of a sudden we're seeing more or suddenly we're seeing less. We are entering into yet another drought year. It wouldn't be surprising that wildlife is, again, accessing our neighborhoods looking for that food, the water that they're not otherwise able to find out in the wild. It's tough, for our wildlife species, but they are resilient, and a lot of these species do self-regulate themselves as well. So if that food availability isn't there, they'll have fewer young. So I guess that was a roundabout way of answering. We don't know exactly why. It could be a number of factors, but yeah, it's hard to know for sure. Just resource availability, seasons, what have you. So yeah, yeah. Question in the back. Yeah, we moved on. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Hmm. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I should have brought that up. I know the city of Glendora actually does have a coyote management plan. Sorry, I should have let Mark introduce that too in the back there, who worked very hard on that. Yeah, definitely. Check out the city's website. You can actually review the management plan specific to coyotes that they worked with on you with you. So, yes, thank you. Question. Oh yeah. Hmm, great. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Habituated. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much for mentioning that. That's awesome to hear. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned. Yeah. Right. I know. It's an uphill battle for sure. Right. So his question was, yeah, can't we just maybe clean out the trash cans with ammonia? Absolutely. That is actually something we recommend as well. So in cleaning trash cans, yeah, certainly with ammonia is a great idea. But like you're saying, as with all deterrents, some bears are going to become used to it while others are not. So yeah, great point. Other questions about any wildlife, I guess now. Happy to talk about anything and everything. So. All right. And I guess maybe I'll just add that is the great thing about deterrence and these proactive strategies, right? It doesn't just apply to bears. Oftentimes, by keeping our pet food inside, right, that's preventing now the coyotes, raccoons, opossums, skunks, everything from accessing your food. So that's the great thing about deterrence and these strategies is it's not just species specific. It really does, goes a long way for all of our wildlife that we live with. So, yeah. All right. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, folks. I'll hang out here in the front. I do have some brochures and my business card as well. Otherwise, thank you so much. Really appreciated the comments, the questions, and have a great evening. Appreciate it.